Good morning, colleagues and guests on our online platforms. It is with great remembrance of dancer, choreographer, and academic David April that we meet this morning for the opening of this year's colloquium. We are saddened by his untimely death, but we honor and celebrate his incredible legacy and his contribution to the South African cultural and creative industries. David April was a member of the advisory committee working alongside with Dr. Lliane and other dedicated and visionary leaders. We will miss his presence enormously, but we are comforted that this week's colloquium continues to be one of the fruits of his labor. It is with huge respect for David April's immense legacy that we dedicate this year's colloquium to honor his life and his work. I also want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Center for Creative Arts to pay remembrance to the late Dada Masilo, who left us all too soon. Dada, too, was a member of our close-knit family at the Jomba Festival. On behalf of the Center for Creative Arts, I'm delighted to welcome you to this year's colloquium. I want to thank you most graciously for choosing to be here with us, rather than, say, choosing to be sitting at the offices of the US Embassy, applying for refugee status to be part of the now legendary 49 white Afrikaners who complained about losing their Braaivleis, rugby, and the Chevrolets. The so-called exile from South Africa brings us right above front with what our colloquium theme for this year, worlding. The way you tell your story shapes the world you live in, or at least if you can tell your story through AfriForum and Solidarity, it will shape who can offer you asylum. There's absolutely no doubt that what we are seeing with the US and the 49 so-called white Afrikaner families is political theater of the most absurdist kind. That while this kind of political farce can offer protection and refuge to some with fat bellies, whilst others who are dying because of intentional genocide against them are not heard at all, simply because some media and political leaders will neither listen to nor let us watch the stories of death and destruction that play out on our screens every single day. As we meet once again at the colloquium to celebrate the power of imagination, creativity, and movement, let us hold space for the people of Palestine who are enduring brutal violence, devastating destruction, and a genocide. As we engage with the theme of worlding, we cannot but become so much more aware that their world is being erased in real time. Let us salute them for their resilience. Let us honor those who have raised their voices, and let us not lose hope that those who unfortunately wield power and control will someday wake up to their senses. This colloquium is only a testament of the power that we as creative workers hold in resisting, speaking out, singing, and dancing against a narrative that dehumanizes people. I want to extend our appreciation to Dr. Lliane, advisory committee, and operational team for making Jomba more than just a stage where we gather to dance. Jomba, over its existence, has been a place where we inspire, challenge, provoke, sensitize, inspire, reimagine, and sometimes, when necessary, just be able to sit in silence to reflect. I'm most delighted that our keynote speaker this morning is Professor Jay Pather, a man of great intellect, superb artistry, and phenomenal integrity, a man who played a significant part in also shaping my world. I wish you all a productive 3 days of making sense of our world. On behalf of the Dean of the School of Arts, Professor Nobuhle Hlongwa, who unfortunately cannot be here due to other commitments, I wish you an inspiring colloquium and declare this colloquium now officially open. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ismail Mahomed. I begin the colloquium this morning by just thanking a few people. And first, of course, is Dr. Ismail Mahomed for his absolutely inspired leadership, both administratively, academically, emotionally, and politically, for the way in which he navigates our spaces for engagement as artists. I want to also thank Wesley and Bash for the delivery of our beautiful colloquium and for making it online and possible. I want to take a moment as well just to thank our Jomba MASIHAMBISANE steering committee, who've been not only critical friends, but have been insight, provocation, and absolutely key to shaping what we do. So I'd like to just name them all. Claire Craighead, who is a lecturer in the Drama and Production Studies Department at the Durban University of Technology. Hannah Ma from the People Unite in Luxembourg, and also, of course, her own Hannah Ma Dance Company. Dr. Mbongeni Mchali, Director of the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies at the University of Cape Town. Professor Sarah Lee Castellan from the Performing Arts in the School of Arts and Creative Industries from the University of East London, UK. She's not with us in the room. She has a family commitments that she has to navigate, but she is with us and has been part of the overall sense of the colloquium and for the past 5 years. I thank also Toby Mapanga, who is a co-convener of the African Festival Network, recently established in 2024. She's currently serving as a co-facilitator and mentor for the Festival Academy, and she is the Jomba Assistant Curator and Project Manager. I'd like to thank Professor Yvette Hutchison for the Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of Warwick in the UK. And as Ismail has alluded to, we are dedicating this colloquium to the memory of David Tatanela April from the University of Pretoria School of the Arts. He's been a key member of our framing and of our band of people who have thought about and provocated in terms of creating this colloquium, and we are delighted to be able to honor and remember him in this way. So thank you to all of you for the incredible space that you've given me and the support and the way in which we've worked in the most collegial and critical friends kind of way. So in terms of this colloquium, our 5th dialogues, which we feel very proud about, we've set out particularly to engage scholarship, pedagogy, and practice that interrogates how dance and dance making responds to, battles with, and navigates the current unfolding socio and geopolitical ideas of borderlands. We engaged ideas of border in 2 ways. Firstly, and more overtly, as a material terrain that we stop at, step over, come up against. But secondly, we engage borders as a metaphor for practices that enact diffraction and contemplation. As Slenbrook has said, what the map cuts up, the story cuts across. We note how many contemporary scholars draw on, not unproblematically, but Martin Heidegger, who argued that a boundary is not that at which something stops, but as the Greeks recognized, the boundary is that from which something begins its presencing. This colloquium has invited scholars, practitioners, and artist researchers to explore how an embodied performance form like dance responds to and revises ideas of borderlands, whether these be real or imagined, whether they manifest between nation states, between North and South, between fluid ideas of gender, between performances of tradition and maternity, between colonial and post or decolonial narratives, shifting binaries between the human and the post-human, between perceptions around ability and disability. We are interested to look at how dance becomes a practice of worlding by creating and enabling experiences of different realities or worlds, shaped by our relationships to bodies and the power structures around us. And in a way, this notion of worlding is engaged in how it reveals how power, knowledge, and materialities shape lived worlds and embodied experiences. Worlding invites dancers and choreographers to explore borderlands and cognately border crossings as acts of transformation. So it's this idea of transformation that allows me to segue to introduce our keynote speaker and provocation, whose words I know will challenge, inspire, and provoke us. And we are very, very grateful that Japath has made the time to be with us and to share his insights. I'm going to, in order to introduce Professor Japath, I'm going to do a little small, slightly edited version of his rather impressive CV, as I know that he's known to many of us. But Jay is a choreographer, a multimedia artist, a curator, a writer, and a teacher. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Cape Town, where he directs the Institute for Creative Arts. He is curator for the Infecting the City Public Arts Festival, the Itka Live Festival, and the Afro Vibes Festival in the Netherlands. He also co-creates Spiel Live Light Art in Cape Town and the Mostra Internacional de Teatro de Sao Paulo in Brazil. He has co-created the Africa 2021 season in France and the live art for Zitmach in Cape Town, as well as the Spiel Art Festival in Munich. His artistic work deploys site-specificity, interdisciplinarity, and intercultural strategies to frame post-colonial imaginaries, decolonization, and matters of social justice. His recent publications include Decolonizing in Dance, a collection of essays co-edited by Sigrid Garis, and an article for Routledge's Companion to Art in the Public Realm. He has 2 books, the first, Transgression, Live Art in South Africa, and the Restless Infections, Public Art for a Transforming City. Pather was appointed a fellow at Queen Mary College, the University of London, the International Chair of Artec and Paris 8 University, and he serves as a board member of the National Arts Festival in South Africa. Also, on a personal note, Jay has been absolutely instrumental in my own life as being the artistic director of Suela Sonke and giving me my first opportunity to make professional artwork with his company, something that I never forget, and a training and a sense of learning about self, which has absolutely been invaluable. He's a friend and a colleague, and I am absolutely delighted with a huge open heart to welcome Jay to open our colloquium.
Thank you. Thank you, Lliane. Thank you, Ismail. Thank you, the Center for Creative Arts and all involved. It is indeed an honor to be here, and I really want to also pay homage to David and Dada, and their absence is massive for us. But thank you for having me. I want to, without ado, stop because I have a terrible feeling I'm going to go overboard or overlong. But I do take my starting point from the abstract that of the conference, which Lliane has developed in her introduction. So I'm not going to go too far into it, except to say that the understanding of borders is not just material terrain, but a metaphor, and citing Heidegger, that it is where something begins. Its presencing informs a great deal of my talk. But the address this morning stays close to geopolitics as it acts upon culture and dance. And I draw from the conference abstract a decolonial worlding that resists certain epistemologies by foregrounding alternative ontologies and artistic practices. And here I'm thinking less alternative practice, but ontologies that are inimical, intrinsic, indigenous, if you want, but silenced or invisibilized, and so appear alternate. Dance and embodiment, therefore, as visible, vital, an activating agent, or as activism. I'm going to do that. So my topic then, compass reset. And so this topic attempts to extend the exhortations in the abstract, but also to challenge some of them. A compass reset, I propose, begins in the first instance to attend to a perennially discomforting border between the academy and what one might construe as the real world, a world outside of the academy. Academic deliberations as imaginaries, as discursive, cerebral activity are, of course, welcome and generative. Often, though, we talk about the political imaginary, the post-colonial imaginary, and so on. And sometimes this imaginary floats rudderless, or at most the rudders of one ungrounded piece of discourse bumps up against each other in an incestuous, self-replicating, complacent sameness. And as we are finding at this time globally, this numbing complacency may not be as benign as it sounds. In purporting, as we do, to locate and ground this theory in some material reality here and now, we therefore must ask, what is this world we want to be worlding our dance, our choreography, and our art with? Worlding as actual and not some abstract imaginary. While it is crucial to speculate on these dreams, we may sometimes be too easily seduced by generic discourse, one that emerges and often generated within the very regions that actually are the unnamed culprits in an increasingly bordered and unspeakably violent world. And today we talk about hybrid formulations and border crossings after Hamid Nafisi, a process of weaving fragile threads of connection between ancient and acquired homes, flexing the North-South relationship and so on. We're attempting to talk about this when, as Ismail pointed out, most of the Western world in all its guises actively and deliberately militates against this in brutal and damning ways. Borders have not just been crossed, but broken, pillaged, violated, and mutilated to allow for a sustained, sanctioned genocide, while their own borders, those of the North, in direct contrast and almost simultaneously, have been strengthened and tightened, walled up, and made impervious, impossible to cross, where immigration and even articulating notions of inclusivity and diversity have become hallmark, severely punishable crimes. Closer to home, a group of privileged Afrikaners born into substantial land and wealth has recently been bestowed with the refugee status and have left the country not with a bang, but a whimper, as T.S. Eliot would argue about hollow men. The basis of this, an unrealized gesture by the South African government signaling minuscule reparation in a country where 8% of the population owes 70% of the land, a gesture that has been characterized as a crime against humanity by arguably the most powerful country in the world, with all the access to information and actual statistics. Beyond the chuckles of incredulity this may generate amongst us, the magnitude of this event as an example of the ghosting of 500 years of unabated coloniality and what that means to our current considerations of borders as material and metaphor should not escape us. In the early 90s, we were enamored with crossing borders and rainbow hybridity as the only way after the violence of apartheid. One of my earliest articles was indeed Dance in Search of Commonality. My earliest works were Shifting Spaces, Tilting Time, and The Beautiful Ones Must Be Born at Constitution Hill. My queer and trans interracial work with the late Peter Hayes, such as The Homosexuals Out in Africa and Raw Dog Night, and directing Cyril Asonka crossing over to a new place altogether, were examples. But today, given the staggering, breathtaking polarization that is steadily coming from the West, any blithe collapsing of borders, uninterrogated and critically assessed, triggers in my mind, of all people, Christopher Columbus, who wrote in 1492, "It is true that they," referring of course to Native Americans, "are so artless and so free with all they possess, that no one would believe it without having seen it. Of anything they have, if you ask them for it, they never say no. Rather, they invite the person to share it and show as much love as if they were giving their hearts." We don't have to stop giving our hearts, but we need to register that for the 80-year-old grandmother living in Ndwedwe, the Cape Flats or Phoenix, that border crossing has already happened with incredible intensity And if one thinks of worlding as needing a certain vulnerability and openness and adaptive mindset, innovating and creating, even in the midst of abject annihilation, worlding is what colonized peoples are saturated with. Against the pressing realities of contemporary geopolitics, this paper then is a gentle plea for pause, caution, and an inventory of the stages of this saturation, a reset to ask the question, given precarities and clear dangers of further deterioration, what then is there to be done, and who does it? So I start with the encounter, and it's amazing how they almost all look the same. The colonial encounter was not incidental. Coloniality sustained over century repeated acts of land and cultural violation, material and metaphoric, systemic destruction and remaking of borders and traditions and entire civilizations. Nor is coloniality locked in a particular time. Germany officially acknowledged that during its colonial occupation of Namibia, it committed the first genocide of the 20th century, and as reported by the New York Times, German researchers believe that the genocide of the Herero and Nama foreshadowed Nazi ideology and the Holocaust. Given that all that as artists, activists, and social scientists, we understand the necessity of timeless acknowledgement and witnessing of abuse in healing. This acknowledgement by the German government came 5 years ago only, in 2021, 100 years after the genocide, reflective of an ongoing, pressing presence of colonial denial in our consciousness and in our midst. Central to coloniality, of course, was the cunning removal of access to art and its practice. Artist intellectual Olu Ogube puts it succinctly. Early colonial education was conceived to ensure dependence by restricting itself to the encouragement of only specific skills for the service of empire, and certainly not those who ascribed full humanity to the colonized, acknowledging full creative abilities in her. It was into this territory that primitivism was written. And as art and aesthetic sensibility were crucial signifiers of a civilized station, the destruction of African culture and denial of access developed for the colonial project to flourish. In Ogribe's words, the unbridgeable distance between savagery and nature. And this is where modernity emerges as more than a shape-shifting mischief maker, but thief and criminal. And I call this section the myth of modernity. Decolonial theorist Rolando Vasquez distinguishes the Western Academy, where the temporal frame of modernity starts with the Industrial Revolution, from the non-Western history of the West, which locates the inception of modernity in 1492, the onset of colonialism, where this distinction between what was primitive and what was civilized starts to take hold. Before 1492, there was no Western project of civilization, but a Europe at the margins of the world. It is colonization that enables Europe to write itself as the locus of enunciation, as a place that holds the power of representation. 1492 would enable the West to advance the idea that the colonized would always be in the process of becoming civilized, and modernity becomes an extension of that. This wave of European modernity, the modern as we call it, that was ushered in to replace all that violent coloniality left in its wake, was perhaps the most sustained, continuing as it does until today. This ideology wrapped its tentacles around everything from systems of governance through to systems of art and culture, rendering inferior anything that is not modern. And look how carelessly we use that binary traditional, often meaning African, and modern, often with some European influence. and validates the continued ownership of material and cultural wealth by the West or their messengers in colonized lands. However, with relation to our invitation to border crossing and hybridity, it would be reductive to see then the subsequent appropriation by colonized cultures of aspects of Western modernity as defeatist, fatalist, and nihilist. In our article, Reappropriation as Resistance, African Modernisms and the Entanglement with the West, Kojo London writes, instances of appropriation should not be interpreted as passive, uncritical embraces of European cultural hegemony. Rather, they demonstrate the capacity for African artists to act as resistive agents, reappropriating Western art as a subversive means for disrupting colonial power, while also at the same time affirming African subjectivities. This construction of border crossing and appropriation as acts of resistance is amply displayed in the shifting cultural attributes of so many organs and products of artistic and cultural production over centuries. There are many examples of this, of course, and I'm going to just go through a few. The Nazareth Baptist Church, led by Isaiah Shembe at the turn of the previous century, at the height of colonialism, in response to the imposition of Christianity by missionaries, 4 million followers refused to abandon African worship practices, forced out of actual churches. For this reason, these worshippers, of course, as we know in KZN, worshipped on the side of mountains or sometimes simply inside a circle marked by rocks painted white. The use of flowing white robes, animal skins, with Scottish kilts and pith helmets marks a highly sophisticated sense of crossing, adaptation, and reimagination. Stratamia is another example, of course, developing as it did in the basements of mine workers' compounds. The encounter with modernity seamlessly reflected in smart suits, reimagining of the dance performed on large swathes of land normally, but now confined to compounds, and the dance of the cat quietly practiced at night under cover of darkness while some slept and some danced, becomes an enduring and definitive aesthetic. And this carries through in contemporary innovations, the work of Gregory Matoma, Kudus Anikeku from Nigeria, and of course, as we know, with Mamela Nyamza's work, and Hatched Ensemble is a really good example of this, and Nelly Sivatlaba. I'm going to try to show a video now, and please bear with me.
We wanted to work with this androgynousness, not that we wanted to do it, but in a way it must come out within the work. Masculinity, even, I mean, we are women, so femininity will be there without any question. So in a way, we came with stories. These are stories, many stories. Even though we don't talk about weight, but you see that there's an issue of weight, you know? Even if we don't talk about color, race, you can see that there's an issue about it.
I mean, across the world, it's still an issue, you know, to bring in a black ballerina. It doesn't fit in with the color codes or whatever. When we were interested in doing something together, we were like, okay, what? What can we do? And then we thought maybe it would be interesting to actually get into the ballet male posture, the masculinity in ballet. I always wonder why men are more successful than women, especially black. What makes men important? Why are men important? So those politics, but also the politics of, who can do ballet, who's allowed to do ballet, and when it suits who can lift who. I didn't do this piece to give solutions, It's just posing questions.
Oh,
Let's take it back to Washington now, where...
So sorry, you weren't meant to hear all of that. This is what this is Ismail trying to get into my PowerPoint. There we go. Oh, no. Oh, I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Okay. Sure. Wesley, please tell me if it's all okay or if there's a problem. Thank you. So sorry about that, but that was a rare piece of footage, I think, of a very seldom seen last attitude, which hasn't been performed for a long, long time. And I thought it is a really powerful, very direct example of border crossings on a variety of levels, which the conference abstract refers to, but also this this notion of taking on the modernity in a very interrogative way by both these choreographers. So I'm going to talk a little bit now then as on cross-cultural flows. In these conceptual border crossings, co-option, sophistication, and reappropriation are hallmarks, but complicated by the already integral presence of the anti-narrative and non-realistic sets of aesthetics in pre-colonial Africa. Becomes evident in the clearly African origins of later so-called avant-garde European art movements such as Cubism that populates modernity. And this we're seeing with regards to the influence of Cubism, but Kojo London makes an important comment. The distinction between the indigenous and the foreign, especially in the context of modern African art, reproduces an oversimplified, reductive binary that overlooks the reality of cross-cultural flows between Africa and the West. That's a very useful configuration. And robs modern African artists, who often are accused of being derivative of their claims to artistic autonomy. The tendency to exclude the major contributions of extra-Occidental cultures to supposedly superior and civilized culture is poignantly revisited in artist Yinka Shonibari's exhibition titled African Spirits of Modernism. Shonibari is known for such startling works as Scramble for Africa, This Moment, alluding to this historical meeting in 1984 in Berlin when the continent was cut up with no African present. And this work, not literal, but abounds with hidden messages in the headless leaders, but no less than in the fabric that clothes them, which is in Dutch print fabric. This fabric, inspired by Indonesian batiks, manufactured in Europe but not popular in Europe, was sold to Africans, demonstrating this cross-cultural flow and interconnectedness. Capturing the burgeoning interest in African art in Paris in the 1920s and playfully described by Shonibari as Picasso in reverse, the artist explores in African spirits of modernism similar themes by juxtaposing icons of classical European antiquity with African artifacts from Picasso's collection. challenging notions of cultural authenticity. Shonibari explains, Picasso was interested in appropriating from other cultures, and I also appropriate from European ethnic art. I think Sarah Nuttall's notion of entanglement is very useful here. A condition of being twisted together or entwined, involved with, speaks of an intimacy gained, even if it was resisted or ignored or uninvited, a term which may gesture towards a relationship or a set of social relationships that is complicated, ensnaring, in a tangle, but which also implies a human foldedness wrought from a common, though often coercive and confrontational experience. It is an idea which signals largely unexplored terrains of mutuality. With reference to her work, Portrait of Myself as My Father, Nora Chipamere wrote, and I'll go through some images of the work, this piece considers the African male through the lens of capitalism, Christianity, colonialism, liberation struggles, and how these political and cultural traditions impact the African family and society on a global scale. Perhaps the curiosity came from compassion for the Black male. Is the sacrifice of the Black male body object necessary for civilization's God, for modernity's God, the global capital's God? I'm just going to play a moment. And this is just a section of her video, a dance video, King Lady.
Superhero. The question is how to become a superhero. African superhero. A black African superhero. A black African man, woman, superhero. Yale, manani mbote mi Angola, nabiso, Angola, mo, hena, tokos. Step 1. Learn to swag like a black African man, woman, superhero.
And so it carries on. All right. Well, the contemporary dance is occupied with the body as archive. In spaces of erasure, the body as an archive that carries innate sense of borders imposed and borders violated. A kind of body remembering becomes crucial. And Faisal Nyakula writes, when the Europeans arrived in the Congo, our ancestors lost their own methods of preserving history. People talk about colonialism as a black page in history, but it is not a page because you can turn a page. It is not a page, but a line that runs through history, that runs through me. Dancers offers me possibilities. He goes on to tell us how in one of the most important languages in the Congo, the Lingala, the same word lobi means both yesterday and tomorrow. The ancestors who came up with the words could have thought of two words, but they didn't. It speaks to how the unborn are connected with the ancestors, how past and future have no border and intimately connect. And this border crossing in time becomes a really crucial moment for us. Nelisiwe Xaba does this exceptionally powerfully when she refers to these zoos that were created as recently as 1958. And in this work, And Sheil references this continuity when he wrote, "Time is not a series, but an interlocking of presents, past, and futures that retain their depth of other past, presents, and futures, each age bearing, altering, and maintaining the previous ones." So one of the singular forms of cultural representations of this intersection of so-called ethnicities and border crossing as power is the Cape Minstrel Carnival, a celebration of legacy marked on the 2nd of January, the one day in the year which slaves were given off. Nigel Davids writes, "The carnival is a repertoire sustained through generational and collective participation. The Khumalichis, original Creole songs, are a blend of Dutch, Netherlands lichis and Muslim Khatib performances. The Khuma drum, used to beat out the songs, rhythms, has its roots in indigenous African, possibly Khoi cultures, and the drums of Java or Malaysia. And the lyrics themselves are mostly in Afrikaans, the language formed in the mouth of slaves, which of course was a term coined by Phumla. This configuration and willing of creativity in the destruction of borders and annihilation of cultures is captured by Dimitri Erasmus in her book Colored by History, Shaped by Place, who invites us to think about colored identity as creolized cultural identities, in which creolization is positioned as what she calls cultural creativity under conditions of marginality. And so I want to present then a series of further provocations for shifts that both embrace border crossings as we understand and taking into account contemporary global politics. And when I talk about, I'm going to just skip Tanya Peterson because I think I'm going to be running out of time. We can come back to that if we need to. And if we're talking about a world in closer to home, I guess what I mean by that is simply that if we understand border crossings to be about bridges, then in the post-colonial environment of great material loss, even greater psychic distension, there are many bridges to build, but those bridges may be just about a bridge between what we think we have gained in our flagrant border crossing and a world closer to home. And I'm interested in artists that have been increasingly, and then talking through Tremblement this glissant notion of trembling thinking as instinctual, and that we should refuse all that we can lose time searching, in which we can wander and in which we can counter all systems of terror, domination, and imperialism with the poetics of trembling. It allows us to be in real contact with the world and with the peoples of this world. And I think some of the languages captured by people like Kudusani Keku in his piece Europa is worth just taking a brief look at. For the thesis around worlding closer to home, and that even though he's talking about immigration, I can get this to play. So,
found dead on the side of highway from Kalas.
This development of within the body and in real time of a trembling, but together with factual information.
32 men from Egypt killed. No name from Senegal.
Afghanistan.
No name
Morocco,
from
Nigeria,
from Mali
Gambia,
died.
Togo,
25 Iranian men and 4.
And so artists who are using ritual that moves us a little bit further away from performance and dance as presentational, and using bodies, and especially colonized Black bodies or previously colonized Black bodies as instruments of representation. And I know that there is a great deal to be said about the inclusion of elements of ritual and what that means. And but I think we're on the cusp of trying to press through and figure out how that both connects with audiences, but at the same time, how it connects with our own reach towards a non-representational work. Works like Buhlebezwe Siwani's various performances, Lola Amira, of course, and who's the artist connected to Kanyasile Mbongwa, Stembile Msizane, Charlene Khan, and of course Albert Koza, who started off with the idea and influences of a closet chart. And I just talk about this non-representational trembling and its vast reach. And I'm just going to play you a little bit of.
Tribute to an African civilization that was untempered. This is a tribute to the people who were removed from their homes and forced into slavery. This is a tribute for the people whose family lineage was destabilized, disturbed, and displaced. This is a tribute for the Africans who died in the ocean. This is a tribute for the people who mourn without burying their families. This is a tribute for people who were sold to masters for money.
We are waiting
This
for
is Mtutuzeli Zimba.
It was the mirrors that died. Oka.
Kosanati Kawela.
Yes, earlier, when we were young and the comrades were having these running battles with the apartheid police, you know, you would.
Ondiswa James. This is Lawrence Sickle performing Buhlebezwe Siwani's piece. And Siowa Kambi from Senegal. And within that, I just want to look quickly at Yonola Makoba's work performed very recently around issues of opacity and taking into account ritual performance. I have the dreaded wheel. Okay. I'm so sorry. I have the dreaded wheel, and Wesley did warn me about this. So I'm going to slowly try to get out of it. And if I'm not running too much out of time, Lliane, do I have a few minutes?
Jay, we're at about 10 past 10, so maybe another 10 minutes and then we can have some discussion.
Okay, so I shall just let me just close this and then come back. Thank you. So I'm going to race through it so we have some time. This is a work by Yonela Makoba. I think it doesn't play. And the work is a very intimate ritual to which only women were invited, but there was a camera through which men could view it from the outside. And at one point, the performers very provocatively perform for the camera and catches this idea of representation for the men outside, while inside there's an extremely embodied experience. And this kind of playing with notions of contemporaneity while at the same time working with ancient ritual until it of course becomes a bit of a party. Is something that I think I'd like to talk about. But Lomo writes there are also what one may call anticipatory dances or ceremonies, sorry, trying to see this. Based on the principle of sympathetic magic, in these ceremonies, the people acted not what happened, but what they wished to happen. These ceremonies were based on what anthropologists call sympathetic magic. The people believed that, like always and everywhere, and everywhere, produced like. I'm going to just quickly talk through these ideas around infecting the city that attempt to find this or break through these very severe borders in our cities and take them into performance. Here is a short video. The thing about the city, this particular festival, is this ability to take sometimes very abject performances, but also combine them with these performances for a range of different kinds of age groups that creates this kind of connectivity, which I think is, amongst audiences, which I think has been quite a powerful submission. Stembile Msizane's durational performances also alludes to that ability to take stillness and work with discourse, but also do that in public spaces, as she did when the Cecil John Rhodes statue was being lifted. And Jalili Atiku's work, and I think, talking through this, where activism and Ngoki's image that spurred a whole series of imagery, and then on the other hand, and brings us into art, and here a performance by Tlumani Matweles with the Rhodes statue, then also goes into activism, and this wave of in and out of border crossing that is generative, but more especially is intersectional in a way that it includes class, which very often, in our deliberations and in our artistic practice seems to overlook. Dean Arton's use of public, so when they couldn't perform anymore because of this fear of attack, and turning this into a video and working with publics in that way until, of course, it was declared art, and Itlia's notions of disobedience and Gabrielle Goliath's piece, which I'm just going to play in the background as I try to end, talking about South-South discourses. It's not new. It started with the 1955 Bandung conference, but I think it provides for us another way of looking at these collaborations, and my increasing involvement in South-South activity has been an eye-opener. Dussel writes, given the disproportionate concentration of power in the global north, and given the exercise of power against the global south, the former colonial world whose configurations emerges in the 16th century, it is necessary that this process begins with an interphilosophical dialogue between the world's post-colonial communities. And this interphilosophical dialogue took form in a conference called Languages of the South. It was both performance and conference held in Colombia. And the field of dance was center stage and spoke to these exchanges of spirituality, in particular spiritual practice, with Afro-South American communities and African representatives from all over the continent. I think when I started at the beginning of this talk in this campus reset and taking stock of such integrated border crossing that has happened over so many hundred years, I asked what then is to be done and who does it. As entangled as we are and inspired to think of unifying hybridity, we are also different in privilege and access. And what then are these methodologies of thinking closer to home, within the South and without the South, as in South-South? Because we should be careful that our embrace of hybridity is not simply imbued with this event-centered, time-based performativity that could trivialize the more substantive project of the ongoing battle with an ongoing coloniality. As useful as it is to consider the project as fertile, the turning around of signifiers that locate power in the hands of the privileged in order to begin taking that power back is in itself very far from completion. But the jump that depends on the preparation before, as we know too well, while not excluding or slowing down global initiatives and international crossings, that in these strategies, as we sit inside our theaters and lecture halls, generative answers to global assaults, as South Africa has shown at the International Court of Justice, may well be closer to home. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the disruption.
Thank you very much, Jay. Wow. I'm particularly provoked in the first moment by the idea that borders are not just crossed, but borders have been broken. And the provocation around definitely the idea that worlding is something that the colonized people have been saturated with in terms of these broken borders. I'm going to thank you for that, and also for the richness of being able to see the extraordinary artists that you've showed us as well. So I'm going to ask our beautiful steering committee just to make a comment, provoke a question to your your keynote. And I'm going to start, if I don't mind, with your colleague and friend Mbongeni Mchali. Mbongeni.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jay, for your ever illuminating and interesting kind of discourse on this issue. I am really interested in the kind of, for want of a better word, case studies that you kind of presented, which kind of provide this wide range of responses to this concept of the border and these kinds of distinctions between senses of identity in this kind of complicated space of modernity. And perhaps it's my own personal predilection, but I'm going to turn to others, Venus diptych as one of the kinds of things that I always seize on, because there's multiple ways that work seems to engage with this concept of the border, is that I see it formally in a kind of visual approach to the body and to costuming, but then there's also this complex dialogue around the form of dance itself, right? And the meeting of these various traditions that she draws on. Yeah, so I find that kind of choreographic approach that leans into multiple different kinds of visual devices as well as gestural, right? Exciting as a way to think of how to reconceptualize the border and to move it away from, I think, the obsession with thinking about it as a physical space, as a terrain, rather than a conceptual elaboration of multiple kinds of terrain. So thank you for kind of surfacing that through a very evocative kind of set of visual cases or examples. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Hannah Ma.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot to digest and to take in. Thank you, Jay. I think what I wanted to comment on are two things like the broken border that, I mean, I think from my family's experience leads to, I would say, dislocated identity and like the inability to reroute with ancestors that are not there that you can ask. And then that I feel that very much resonated with me with the you didn't say non-linearity of time, but that time is a line and it's not close entities that are following each other, but it's a line that runs through time, history, and bodies and identities. So I felt like the non-linearity of time and the non-possibility reroute with an ancestral line is very one and the same thing. And that leads to, I think, artistic practices of ritual, because I feel like sometimes ritualistic practices are perceived as something that is a choice, but something it's also not a choice. It's the only way of making something meaningful, because there's so much vastness and so much like emptiness in terms of factual, the factual ability to reroute. And I find the examples that you brought so essential in terms of claiming that unknown space, also referring to out of historia and out of theoria, where the academical discourse is so much based on scholars that are not evident. It comes like the Western discourse that is, we are forced to study. So it has nothing to do with a lot of people that need something else to refer on, and to claim that space is so important. And yeah, I think that was very beautifully, thank you so much, like presented to also empower the upcoming or the artists that will reclaim that spaces and be more confident in that.
Exactly.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I mean, just to say that yeah, it's extremely exciting. I mean, just understanding how it's happening in Southern Africa, and certainly how I've seen it happen in Brazil. For example, it's kind of like a as you say, it's a necessary movement. It's not a choice. It's a necessary movement to fill those gaps, and the complications of representation, the hardness, the sadness of constantly representing is and what a vacuum it creates. Yeah, so yeah, you're quite right. It's no longer a choice. It's becoming more and more integral.
But it also comes as we feel like I feel like for me I would like when it comes to worlding, I would also like to add like tribing or being anti-ing, because this is something where I would feel that this is how I find the people I work with, or we find us, or that our ancestors are, let's just bring us together. And then it's easy, because then you just become a channel. But this is something you don't learn. It's always about performing, and performing is very much code switching, what we try to not do anymore. So I think the mirroring, or to be mirrored by someone or get connected with other artists, that you can become empty and you become a channel, and then you can find a connection or deeper truth it's very much claimed. And I feel like growing up in the West, and it took me a very long time to come to that point also, I was always dancing for that reason, but it was not reflected. And so I felt like this is something that maybe also have to be brought a bit more to the forefront, to focus on that, and to give younger artists, or to make that part of the curriculum. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Jay. I'm going to call on Claire Craighead.
Thanks, Lliane, and also Jay, ever inspiring. I really enjoyed listening to you this morning. When you ended, I've actually typed it out. You called your presentation a disruption, and I really, really loved that. I think that is when we talk about, borders and border crossing in the ways that we know and are doing, problematically as it is disruptive. It should be disruptive. It's messy, and it is that kind of abjection. I think that is quite generative as well. We're told that, or I guess I can't speak for everyone, but when I think of a border in the way that it's represented, in the maps also that you showed, the lines are seemingly clear and easy, but in embodiment, in the livedness of it, they are not. And I really, I wanted to kind of comment on that. I love the disruption. I love the mess. I love the chaos of it, because as the conversation has been going, and I'm sorry I got kicked out for a while, but I did pick up on the idea of, between you and Hannah, this idea of a necessary movement towards otherwise ways of being, this idea of being otherwise as a generative place and space, not as a place of just being difficult, as sometimes, if you call someone otherwise, they're being difficult. But this real sense of taking that notion of otherness and wiseness, and kind of understanding also, in terms of worlding, the idea perhaps of reworlding, the idea perhaps of, again, the idea of many worlds within one world, and those that you spoke about right at the beginning of your presentation that are deliberately and violently invisibilized. And I really hope that the rest of the colloquium over the next few days are going to, as you have started to do, pull out those invisible, those ghosted, deliberately and violently so ghosted spaces that are not neat borders. They are messy, and they should be. They have to be at this point in history. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. I'd like to call on Yvette Hutchison.
Thanks, Jay. As ever, totally inspiring and challenging. I've got a million thoughts. So I'm just going to pull out one or two. I was very struck by the parallels between what you were speaking about and Guillermo Vedecchia, the Argentinian Canadian artist. But he talks about the fact that we can't live on the border. So what does it mean to be on the border? It feels, the lovely image you had of the tightrope walker, for me, that's the border, and the balance and the precarity, but also something we're negotiating and navigating. And it takes adjustment of movement all the time. So what I was really struck by your paper was two things: the way you are calling for the challenge to time and the world view of time. And I'm very struck in living in the global north, how people always challenging the notion of African time. They talk to me about, I'm in African time if I'm not on time. So that it's a particular paradigm, right, that has been imposed upon people, and reclaiming time. But time's also very linked to movement. As a disabled person, it takes me longer to do things, and time means something different to me. So I'm also really interested in differential movement practices. And I was also struck when you were speaking of Hoshini Barma Young's work around falling, floating, and flickering. Some of those things happen in ritual, but also with disabled people, we fall. And what does it mean to take those practices that she talks about as being abnormal or socially unacceptable movements? And a lot of that civilizing is what's acceptable, what is civilized. And I really find that those provocations you are offering are very generative, and I think ways that we could change the world's normate views of people in an intersectional way, whether that's around the global South and race or in the work I'm doing around disability. I think it's really important to challenge those normate ways of being in the world, but also ways of moving in the world. And of course, dance is about movement. So thank you so much for a really rich, I'm going to think, you know, for a long time about what you've said, and I'm looking forward to being able to watch this again when it's part of the archive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Yvette. Our last committee member, Tobile Mapanga.
Hi everyone, thank you very much, Chair. And yeah, wow, feeling quite emotional, staying on the other side of the world and seeing our world staying so close to so many borders, having crossed so many borders myself recently. Thank you, Jay, for making visible the flows of cross-culture, the necessity of sometimes appropriating, the appreciation also in that appropriation. Yeah, I'm feeling deeply emotional.
Thank you, Toby. I think that Jay's paper is a paper that the ideas have provoked me to rethink a lot of the ways I think about things, and I'm just picking up on Toby's notion around appropriation. Jay's provoked a kind of like 360 turn around thinking about notions of appropriation and what it means to talk back as a transgression of a border and a boundary. And I think that that's something that I'd like to think about and contemplate, and really looking forward to re-listening to Jay's paper, and to just thank Jay for being a kind of light to us, and for being a guide, and for provoking us to rethink our provocation, our colloquium provocation, but also that beautiful thing that you said at the end, that when you think about the criminal court of justice and about how those processes are going to need to have to come closer to home, I kind of felt my spirit quiver, you know, or vibrate when you said that, and definitely something to think about. And so I thank you, Jay, for your time on behalf of all of us in the room and those who are listening, to really thank you for the care and the kindness of a presentation that really, you know, kind of woke us up and to set the tone for the colloquium. So thank you, Jay. I don't know if there's anything you want to say as an ending, or you good?
Oh no, I really appreciate all your comments. It really makes so much means so much to me, because you know, you think about all of this and these things, what's happening in the world gets to you, and you try to leave it out and pull it in and navigate it. So it's only in communities like this that you hear a certain resonance that may hold. Yeah, no, it's been good to think about this at this time, even though it's like, how do you? Yeah, it's been wonderful to share this with you. I wish we were all together, but anyway.
I know it's an interesting thing how technology has also become a border crossing, and in a way quite interesting for that as well. Thank you, Jay, very much. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to be watching a Ugandan artist called Robert Simpija film Alienation, which is a film he made in 2021, also from a provocation around border crossings, and it's one of my most favorite dance films about African cities and about how we situate ourselves. It's deeply personal and deeply political. And after the viewing of the film, which is about 15 minutes, we're going to be in dialogue with the beautiful Robert himself. So let's take a short break. We're back at 10:45. So there's a short break. See you all in a bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.